Hello, YouTube! I am in my silly form today, again, because, I don't know, it's fun, but hello, how are you doing? We're gonna be watching the mechanical arms race that kills online games. I believe this is about competitive gaming and how it affects the market, so let's get into it. Say hello to YouTube, Twitch chat, say hi! And to YouTube, you gotta say hi to Twitch, or you're being very, very rude. Come join us over here on twitch.tv daily at noon PM PST. Yep, noon PM PST. It's a lot more fun over here, and you miss a lot of stuff. We've done nothing but do brain rot until this exact moment, and you missed all of that brain rot. You're not gonna see that. That's very, very sad. So let's go ahead and get into the video, and come join us if you ever have time. Yippee! Subscribe! This is a badass intro for like a video essay. Go off.
Multiplayer games, particularly player versus player games, are a very difficult thing to get into. No other type of entertainment media has the minimum skill requirement that can be found, particularly in modern titles. For decades, gamers have been enjoying and mastering a huge variety of games. And as the medium ages and the technology that drives these experiences improves, what gamers are capable of continues to expand. Gaming has been a staple for so long now that some have played their entire lives. Some have even built multi-million-dollar careers. Professionals who play games competitively at live events in front of millions of spectators and fans.
I'm gonna be honest, I don't know that a lot of professional players make millions. My understanding is that they don't really make that much for how much they actually have to do and like what they make for the actual teams. I don't think a lot of those players make millions of dollars. I think it's very few professional players that even make that much. And I think that's also why a lot of them end up being streamers after being professionals, because they can make better money as streamers than as professional video game players.
By refining their craft over tens of thousands of hours. The rise of the competitive gamer has been nothing short of meteoric, but it does make you wonder, what happens when everyone you play against is super competitive? Competitive culture.
It means you get called slurs a lot. This is like a hypothetical. It has nothing to do with me. But if you're a kind of individual who only will play a Vandal in Valorant, but you also don't really be hitting headshots, yeah, you get called a lot of slurs. You get yelled at a lot. But you know what's so fun about being the Vandal is like, yeah, I'm not hitting those headshots. I'm not hitting those headshots. I am a body shot bandit. But that like 1 in every 500 times I hit that headshot, it is very rewarding. And I'm gonna keep doing it. I do it for the gamba, baby. I'm an ex-gacha game addict. I'm doing it for the gamble.
In gaming is rife and touches every game, whether it fits or not. Sweats, tryhards, cheaters. Familiar accusations to those who inhabit the online gaming space. You can't go 20 minutes in an online forum without someone complaining about someone else. And while extremely common, it's not always unfounded. Play any online game long enough and you're bound to run into someone who takes it extremely seriously, who treats it like a day job, despite the clear absence of pay or even recognition.
This is true, for sure. However, I think that's only really a problem if you're not playing in a competitive queue. I get annoyed by that tryhard only and specifically when I am in like casual mode, essentially. If you're in competitive, that's why you opened the rank queue to me. But it is really annoying. I get so, dude, you know what pisses me off so bad? I know a lot of y'all don't play TFT, so you're not gonna relate to this at all. This is not relatable. But I hate that scouts in a casual match of team fight tactics don't come on my board past the first like 2 rounds to see if I'm doing the same comp as you. Don't position your to try to counter me. Don't come on my board. Don't look at my stay on your own board and jerk your while I play team fight tactics casually, you try-hard bitch.
Someone who has optimized the game down to the finest details through thousands of hours of trial and error. Is this a bad thing? Like, sure, you can do whatever you like with your free time, but does this have any sort of notable impact outside of annoying the occasional Redditor? Could competitive culture, for example, kill off a game's player base?
Yeah,
In today's video, we're going to dissect the way player skill influences online games, look at some examples of games that might have been affected, and potential ways that these things can be mitigated. Let's cover some...
So I guess I'll give how I feel first, and then I'll listen, and then we'll see if my response changes. I actually think that competitive games over time are becoming less desirable in a lot of ways, because I think a lot of people don't want gaming to be their second job after they get home from work. And the thing about a lot of competitive games like Valorant, where it's like high competitive, high skill base, playing, is that you have to play a lot of games. Like, you have to spam games, you have to be in that queue constantly, you have to keep playing. And you also have to dedicate yourself to the craft of being good. And I think a lot of people, that was really fun and desirable, specifically when they did not have a job. People who were younger, who started gaming around the sort of Counter-Strike boom of competitive shooters and stuff like that, around League of Legends, now they're growing up and it's sort of less exciting to come home and play and, do your second job of doing 8 hours of Valorant so you can get a little bit more LP. Like, it's just not nearly as enjoyable to do when you already have a job you have to put your life into, and you're not going to be a professional player, and you're not streaming it. It's just not really worth it anymore, I think. It's also that people are so much better at the games, because when it was before, in the earlier days of competitive gaming, there were less people who were cracked, because there were less people who had access to video games. There were less people that played that much video games. Now everybody kind of play video games, and everybody has access to those games. And so it's a lot harder to get to that upper echelon of gaming. And so I think that over time, competitive games have gotten less attractive. There are fewer new competitive games coming out that do well, if they even come out at all. And additionally, I think people really just want good games that they can play with their friends for fun. And a lot of times the thing is about Valorant is like a game like Valorant. I'm using Valorant because he's got a lot of shooters, and I actually started as a Valorant streamer, if you guys don't know. Is like, it can be fun to play with your friends, but if you play a lot of Valo with your homies who play Valo, eventually 99% of those games are going to be y'all crashing the out. You're going to be crashing the entire out. You're going to get mad at each other. You're going to get mad at the random teammates in your party. You're just going to get mad. And that's because of the competitive aspect of it. And because the games, they don't have as much of a fun aspect to it. I think the competitiveness of some games takes away from the fun. I think it's going to become less of the standard and more of, I guess, a niche interest. And I think a lot of people just want to do fun shit. And so people will do fun shit instead of playing Valorant all the time. And these games just require a lot of dedication if you really, really want to get good at them. So that's my thought, which was a little bit long-winded, but whatever.
Important terminology first. The skill ceiling is the measure of the potential peak performance in a game. It's not generally quantifiable, but it becomes fairly apparent through a deep understanding of a game's mechanics. The skill ceiling depends by and large on what the game lets you do, willingly or not.
That's fair.
This limit may rise or fall depending on updates or discoveries made by players. It's something that is actively coveted by the more competitively focused, for fun or profit. In that vein, you have your own theoretical skill ceiling that might be different to the game's.
I would say that my personal skill peak, they put here.
Coveted by the more competitively focused, for fun or profit. In that vein, you have your own theoretical.
I would say my own theoretical skill peak is more like, this is the floor and this is the ceiling. I'm about yay here. And I like competitive games because I like competitive stuff, but I'm more into TFT because it's a strategic game and not a skill, mechanical skill game as much. Or not at all.
Skill ceiling that might be different to the game's. A maximum ability level dictated by many variables, like age, natural ability, or available playtime. Conversely, the skill...
And also whether or not you got to play as a kid, because I have to say, trying to get into competitive games as somebody who didn't play games as a kid is miserable. It's genuinely horrendous, just so awful. So I think there is a legitimate factor that if you played games when you were younger and you got more of those motor skills and that muscle memory, it is much easier for you to be good at games. if you didn't start really playing games until you're an adult like I did, it gets hard because you got old adult hands. You didn't learn how to do it when you had young little kid hands.
Or
It's so
is
rough.
the minimum performance required to play something? It's rarely the focus of conversation outside of games that have different methods of play, like unique builds or characters. The skill floor is at its lowest when it comes to single-player experiences,
True.
as these are often designed to be extremely approachable, customizable experiences, fit for any level of play. The use of virtual opponents, or AI, means that players can make a game as hard or as easy as the developers allow them.
True.
When it comes to multiplayer games, however, it's rarely that simple. The difficulty is not just dictated by the developers, but by other players as well. For example, to play at a certain rank in a competitive game, it might demand a much higher skill floor for it to be enjoyable. A game might have
I'm not playing, no. People are way too fucking sweaty about car soccer. It's insane. It's insane. I will never play that game. That is wretched.
Have a lot of mechanical depth or meta builds that put you at a disadvantage if you don't keep up with them. You might start a game late in its life cycle and find yourself behind in its progression. These things can change how accessible a game is to a general audience, particularly the casual crowd. Much like you have your own skill ceiling, you likely have your own skill floor too, which is essentially your tolerance for how bad you can be at a certain game before you quit. More experienced gamers might have higher standards for themselves, but they might still be performing above average compared to most people, but it's not enough for them specifically.
That's how my husband is. He pisses me off because he was like a CS:GO fiend back in ye olden days and like CS:GO source. He pisses me off. He's just good at everything. The second he starts playing it, anything that requires mechanical skill, he's just instantly good at, and it makes me so mad. Makes me so mad. That being said, I'm way better than him at TFT, so slay. But that's because it's a brain game, not a skill game. Well, it's a skill, but like, you know, not mechanical skill.
The skill floor is why game balancing, the act of modifying a game to keep the experience fair, is a significant part of post-launch work. It's so important that even the level of game balancing must be balanced. Don't balance enough and people will feel cheated or forced to play against people who have unfair advantages. Balance too much and nothing sticks out and everything becomes stale and samey.
True.
This is all to say that multiplayer games are an ecosystem, one that is maintained both by developers and players, with people entering and leaving constantly. These ecosystems also mean that active player count is something that is tracked for many different titles, and you can directly see how well a game is performing in the public eye. The launch of a multiplayer game tends to be the point in which it has the most players. Not always the case, but it holds true for most anticipated AAA releases.
That's true.
At this point, both the skill ceiling and floor are at their lowest. People are still getting adjusted to the game, and the full spectrum of experience level can be encountered. This is usually when you'll run into the largest number of casual players. After some time, the player count usually starts to decline. This isn't really an indication.
What game is this? That was COD. I've actually played that COD. It's awful. Timothy Chalamet was in it. I'm dumb. It says Battlefield 5 on the bottom. I did play COD once, though, until I was very shocked to see that Timothy Chalamet was dinking me. I did not like getting dinked by Timothy Chalamet. That was not slay. I stopped playing in one day.
People are still getting adjusted to the game, and the full.
You know why I thought I played it? It's because my husband plays a lot of Battlefield and watches Battlefield videos. He was a Battlefield girly. He was not a Call of Duty girly. That's why. Oh god, that's embarrassing.
Spectrum of experience level can be encountered. This is usually when you'll run into the largest number of casual players. After some time, the player count usually starts to decline. This isn't really an indication of a game's success or failure. Games built off a lot of hype will invariably have that hype fade. And even really well-managed games will struggle to maintain their initial player base.
Well, this is a
At this
single
point,
player.
both the skill ceiling and skill floor start to creep up. The logic behind this is that you're much more likely to stick with a game you understand well over one you don't. Therefore, those players who struggle to play the game are more likely to quit. And the players at the bottom of the skill ladder become less frequent opponents, either because they leave to play something else or because they just get better. This rise in average skill is extremely apparent for games.
I feel like this was like a really big explanation for the longer the game is out, the more people play it and therefore they get better at it. There's like a lot of other words and explanations for that there, but the skill ceiling gets higher, I think, probably primarily speaking, because you just play it more. And there was like a lot of other shit there, but like the more people have the game out, the more they learn the mechanics, the more they understand the mechanics, the more new things come out. Like you get better at the game, the more you play it. Like that's how it works, yes.
Games that don't see a steady influx of new players. As a game continues to age, this cycle continues. Experienced players get better and better, and the player base slowly bleeds active players until they die, whether that be in 10 days or 10 years. This is a
10 days like Concord, that was the joke.
typical multiplayer game life cycle. It's not an exact science. A lot of games' post-launch success depends on what the developers and marketers do with it. Some games can even eventually eclipse their initial player counts, but over a long enough period of time, this will be the fate of every game. YouTube videos behave much the same. They get most of their views early on, but after a while only the more dedicated fans come back to rewatch them. I mentioned that players will leave games that they are bad at. I'm sure if you played a large enough...
I think that we are really focusing on players leaving games because they're bad at them. I think that a lot of people are more than willing to play games that they're not good at if they have a good time. There are plenty of people who play a lot of games even though they're bad at them. Like people play Valorant, a lot of Valorant, even though they're super bad. I stopped playing Valorant because I was starting to have like a real mental issue and it was not like as fun for me anymore. And also because streaming it and trying to learn playing Valorant and stream it at the same time was just not really appealing to me. And so like, I think that this concept that they specifically leave because they are bad, people will play games that they are bad at. I don't think people will only play a game if they're good at it. However, I think people will not play a game if they are bad, and it's really not fun to play unless you're winning. An example is like, I don't play League anymore because in League of Legends, it feels like a single player cannot win the game for you, but a single player absolutely can and will lose the game for you, and you are trapped. You are trapped in that game for so long, even if it's not your fault, and it's just like one really dumb dude sandbagging your whole shit, and there's no amount of somebody being good enough that you can win sometimes. I think that it makes losing in League so unpleasant that I'd rather just not play it, because it just is so miserable when you lost in the first like 5 minutes because your dumb like mid laner got killed 5 times by the jungler, and now you're like their Rengar's fed, and there's just no point because he's a kitty cat and he's got a problem and I just want out. And so I think that when losing in a game is too miserable to want to continue playing, that's oftentimes when people will quit because they're bad. But if it's like kind of neutral to lose in a game, it's really not so bad. I don't know. Maybe this is like a personal thing, but I think some games make losing so miserable that it's like not worth it. Even if you are bad. As somebody who's not that good at games, I guess it could depend.
A variety of games, you've invariably come across one you didn't click with at all, got destroyed in a couple attempts and uninstalled, in some way failing to reach your required skill floor. But I also mentioned that skill floor is dictated in part by the people playing the game. So the question is, does the skill floor play a significant factor in player retention?
The fact that people are sweating in BattleBit Remastered is the funniest to me ever. But like, I've heard this complaint about the sweaties in BattleBit Remastered so many times, and it's like, it's so funny to hear that it was sad that people were sweating the f out of this is like Roblox COD. Like, it's so funny to me.
BattleBit Remastered is a multiplayer FPS game that left early access last year. It was developed by a very small team and did extremely well after it got some traction on social media. You may have seen clips of it before.
Wait. Is it Battlefield Roblox? Is it Roblox Battlefield or Roblox COD more like? It's more like Battlefield. It does, and now I'm looking at it looks more like Battlefield, yeah. BattleBit Battlefield. Okay, that's fair. That's fair. Okay, so it's more like Battlefield.
Or maybe even played it.
I
the
swear I
gameplay
know
is
the
very
difference.
akin to early Battlefield, but boasts a low poly look that makes it a lot more approachable, especially for players living the low spec gamer life. The modes are strictly team based, and you work alongside many other players to win. It peaked at over 86,000 players post launch, but since dropped to a few thousand just under a year later. By most accounts, a success story. However, some community members suggest that the project was mismanaged, and that the development speed was too slow. which meant that it lost the potential of becoming an FPS staple. Now, I would describe myself as pretty good. I would say at least better than most. I do have a KD of over 2, which I'm very proud of. However, I'm acutely aware of how high the mechanical ceiling goes. And it has all the hallmarks of a first-person shooter with a crazy high skill ceiling. Mid-air strafing, snap aiming, sprint reloading, meta builds, just to name a few. The game certainly does not discourage players from playing in a very sweaty way. Despite all of this, early BattleBit was actually a very casual environment. Most people weren't very good, and most of the clips generated from the game were from people messing around with the proximity chat. However, as the average player got better and better, and understood more of the mechanics and the maps, it became progressively harder to play the game casually. Voice chat got quieter, and the focus shifted towards keeping up with other players. The game quietly lost what had made it popular to begin with. In my opinion, the game's primary shortfall is that it failed to nurture what should have been its main strength, teamwork, and instead bolstered an extremely self-sufficient, mechanic-focused playstyle. It doesn't take much playtime to realise that you interact with your team very little. It didn't help either that the devs seemingly kept buffing things that made working solo more convenient, like the healing bandages.
I wish my husband was here. I want to ask him, because like I have an understanding of some of this stuff, but these were not games that I really played. And so like I wish I could ask him directly, because he would definitely be able to tell me. But I guess to me, I don't know that BattleBit really strikes me as a game that could have ever necessarily been a staple. And I'm going to say that it's primarily because of the art style. And I know that's what makes it sort of different and what makes it nice for young, like for people who don't have really nice computers or whatever. I guess to me, this game does strike me as being a game of the month instantly. A lot of these FPS games, right? These like competitive FPS games especially, primarily do at this point, especially if they're primarily on PC, appeal to adults. And I think that that art style is nostalgic and fun and enjoyable, but not necessarily appealing over the long term. But I guess like to me, when I see a game like this, I would not expect it to be like a game that persevered, because the play style of it and the people that it's like that this kind of game is more so for is older teenagers and adults. However, the art style is very Roblox, Minecraft, childish. And I feel like maybe it was only ever going to be a temporary thing when I look at it. But again, like, I don't know the context of some things. I really wish I could ask my husband about it, if it was like a meta issue or if it just didn't have like staying power. Because this to me doesn't strike me as a game that has like staying power like that, I guess.
Over time, have not only increased in number, but also heal you more and are applied quicker. At this point, you must force yourself to team play, otherwise you're just running from objective to objective, shooting people on the way, which not only gets old very quickly, but when mechanical skill is the primary focus, not playing well matters a lot more, since there's no other aspect of the game to fall back on, like interacting with your team. I think even the devs noticed this too, as they added a squad preference screen, where you can choose how serious you want your squad to be. An overwhelming focus on mechanics that drives non-mechanical, casual players away, whether intentional or not, is the crux of the problem. And
I feel like I really want to disagree. I feel like in general, it is typically better to allow a high skill player to win a game than to force higher amounts of team reliance on your team. When games force you to cooperate with your team, it works really well. Specifically, if you're in a lobby full of your friends. When games force you to work with your team and rely on your team in order to win, it thereby forces you to rely on dum-dums if you do not have that full 5 stack or whatever. You have to hope to God that you get players on your team that have their brain cells on and are actually intelligent. And the problem with that is that usually most of the people you're going to play with are lobotomites who have no idea what it means to work as a team at all. League of Legends, you have a high amount of reliance on teamwork. But the problem is that they don't even have like a proper voice chat or nothing. They barely have like text chat now. I think League of Legends is really hard to get into. It's hard to get back into as somebody who used to play, because like that reliance on your team only is enjoyable When you know who your teammates are and you can communicate with them and you know how they play. When you are playing with randos who basically have only half of their brain on and the other half is jerking their peanuts, it's like miserable when you have to rely on teamwork. People don't want to work with a team. They want to sit in top lane and split push the entire game and lose because it's always a 4v5, you know? So like being able to have games where you can reliably carry if you're better and you have to accept that you're not good if you're not good, I actually don't think is that bad. However, again, it sucks when losing is really, really unpleasant.
Orbit is far from the only game that suffers from it. I describe it as the mechanical arms race. And it's a really tough thing to quantify, but it's noticeable on both an individual game scale and across the games industry as a whole. In some way, either as a symptom or a cause, games get too competitive for their own good, and bleed their casual audience because of it. It's a problem not just for competitive games, but casual ones too. It's often such an issue that you can almost tell how competitive a game is going to be in the future, just by playing it for a few hours. Answer this question for me. Have you ever played a new release, either alone or with friends, and had that thought creep into your mind that you're not going to be playing this game in a month?
Most of them.
Despite how fun it might be in the moment? Or maybe you're playing a game and you suddenly become aware of how the game operates, and you can foresee what the rest of your playtime would look like. So what if I do that, you might be wondering. What does it matter if I play a game for 100 hours and then burn out after a couple months? I still got my money's worth. For you, not really a problem. But it runs counter to what most multiplayer games companies are aiming for, and it's having serious implications for the gaming industry. Games as a service isn't all too new of a concept, but has surged in popularity as of late. The concept is simple. Games are supported post-launch with new content, and in turn you continue to play the same game, and continue to support that game through various means. This is why it's common for someone to have a main game that they play more often than others, as introducing new content to an old game keeps it fresh, and means that fans get more of what they know they'll like. This tends to work in favour of games companies too, as they get more money from the average player with much less development time.
Fair.
A 2023 study that surveyed over 500 games companies reported that 95% of them were aiming to release a live service game in the future. The only limit to this system is that these games live and die by their ability to retain players, which involves not only keeping people interested year round, but also competing against other similar live service games for their attention too. If Apex Legends, for example, flopped on release, that likely would have killed the Titanfall IP right then and there, potentially alongside Respawn Entertainment.
Right.
While the gaming industry is huge, there's only so many players to go around. So maybe sort of ironically, competition is fierce. So what does this have to do with game mechanics? Well, you have to enjoy something about a game to continue playing it.
Yes.
There's only so many marketing tactics a game can pull, and if you find a game too stressful or uninteresting, most people can't be manipulated forever. Even addicts will eventually drop games that stop treating them well. But casual players can drop a game over the smallest of things.
That's not true. That's not true. That's not true. And you know how I know that is? It's because people are still playing Genshin Impact that started in 2020. Nah, the addict will not stop even if the company doesn't treat them well. That's not true. They will stay in that and defend that forever. And that's on God. That's for real. Sorry. I had my little Genshin Impact shade. There are motherfuckers who've been playing Genshin Impact to 2020 who still be playing that game and defending that game. And that game, they literally spit on their players daily. It's insane.
Which means that how a game handles its experience determines a lot about how it performs publicly. And since so many games are vying for your attention, the options to go elsewhere are usually extensive, which means that it's easier and easier for games to bleed casual players if they're not careful. New games must also compete with established ecosystems that have now been around for an incredibly long time.
That's true.
Counter-Strike, for example, has been around for over 20 years at this point. And as much as I'm sure veteran players love to poke fun at the game, how the game feels to play has been carefully refined for decades. Even now, Counter-Strike...
Yeah, but you know what really keeps Counter-Strike... You know what really keeps Counter-Strike players a lot around? It's the gambling. I'm joking mostly. I get it. Like, people do really love Counter-Strike, but I mean, hey, games! If you really want to keep motherfuckers around, get yourself a gambling system that requires a lot of money. They will stay for that sunken cost fallacy forever. Because, like, yeah, maybe Counter-Strike 2 is a miserable game sometimes, and the rank system kind of sucks and like you crash out every time you play it. But god damn it, I have that $600 knife. I'm not leaving.
Continues to break player records year over year. It's kind of like picking between a friend you've known your entire life and a new person who may or may not be a better friend in the long run. You might try hanging out with this new person, but you know exactly who you're going back to should things turn bad. All of this means that producing a live service multiplayer game in such a saturated market is a serious gamble.
That it is.
Now, having a game flop because it fails to retain a casual audience is a very real issue faced by many in the space.
That's fair.
When it comes to talking about skill in games, it would be silly not to talk about the elephant in the room, which is skill-based matchmaking. The idea is that a game measures your performance, usually through some sort of rating system, and then curates matches so you play with and against players of similar skill to you. The main benefit is that it provides tangible progression for players in ways that some games would lack otherwise.
That's true.
It also helps prevent less experienced players from getting stomped. And it allows games with smaller lobby sizes, like 2015's Rocket League or 2023's The Finals, to maintain a sense of fair play that wouldn't exist if things were random. Chances are, if you're watching this video on
The Finals. How is The Finals doing on Twitch? I know Twitch is not like the only way to know how a game is doing, but it's always interesting to me. How many people are watching The Finals? Oh, they got 1.6K. This is better than BattleBit.
game mechanics, you likely have seen some strong opinions on skill-based matchmaking.
I do.
You might even have some of your own.
I do
A
have
common
those.
perception is that these systems, even when well managed, frustrate players and sometimes don't prevent the things they were designed for, like unfair matches.
That's
A
true.
long-term concern with skill-based matchmaking is that, almost against your will, you're fast-tracked into a competitive arms race just to enjoy yourself. Since everyone you play with has, and usually expects, a certain minimum level of ability, there's no opportunity for you to relax and maybe take things a little slower.
That's true.
Your reward for playing well is harder games, and your reward for playing casually is, well, losing.
Yeah, and this is kind of what I was saying about, like, I think that competitive games are going to be less of a standard and more of a niche as time goes on and newer gamers join, right? Because a lot of people who play a lot of competitive games have been playing competitive games since they were like, 12. As soon as they had the hand-eye coordination to do such a thing, they was doing it. And so I think over time, because of this, they will become less popular. I think a lot of these games realistically make losing really, really miserable. It feels really bad to lose in a game when you know that you've probably lost in the first 5 or 10 minutes of that game and it's like a 40-minute game. It is miserable to have to play out a game because your team won't surrender or maybe you have a chance when you know ultimately that you've probably lost in the first 10 minutes. There's no way to have any amount of fun at all if you are losing in League, where I don't think it's as bad in other games. I can still have a relatively okay time in like Valorant if I'm losing, because I could just dick around and do some silly shit. I think this happens a lot of the time in games that have an economy like that, where if you win more, you get more money and then you get nicer shit. Games with an economy get decided oftentimes, if the meta is not done right, so early. They get decided so early on into the game, and then you have to keep playing them, just like watching the gold on the enemy team spike and yours drop, and it is so hard to come back from that. And I think a lot of these games make it very difficult to recover when your economy is already a lot of times it's like there's no way to make anything fun out of losing a game of League. It's just not possible.
So in some way, you're left with no choice but to endlessly improve, even if focused gameplay isn't what you're looking for. On a larger scale, these systems also promote competitiveness and raise the mechanical skill of your average gamer.
True.
Which in some ways is a good thing. The recent competitive push has allowed mainstream games to become more mechanically complicated and include greater depth, as your average gamer is a lot more competent at understanding new games than they were in the past. However, this does mean that multiplayer games in particular are harder to approach at a casual level. It's almost a requirement for any player versus player game to feature some sort of rank progression, as a lot of gamers have come to expect that whenever they're faced with human opponents. The near absolute saturation of competitive modes means that, oftentimes, non-competitive modes might as well be competitive anyway.
Oh, I was like, this is broken? I guess to me, the solution to this, you should play with friends. Playing competitive games alone, like back-to-back queuing competitive games is so miserable. It's so miserable. It is so bad for your mental. If you're playing competitive games and you're playing ranked queue games and you're miserable, what did you think was going to happen when you decided you wanted to get past Emerald in Valorant and you started like spam ranked queue? You thought you were going to have a good time? You thought you were going to be happy? You thought you were going to like your teammates and feel like it was fair? Let's be so for real. But I mean, if you want to have fun in some of these games, I think some of these games, it is like so impossible to have fun. But if you want to have fun in some of these games, just play casual with your friends. It's not that bad.
The Finals is a free-to-play, team-based, first-person shooter released at the end of 2023.
Yep.
I've spoken about this game before on this channel, but to give context here, it mixes a lot of different shooter styles to make quite an interesting blend of both familiar and experimental mechanics. The game has a very
I was surprised that the finals dropped off so hard. Again, this is another thing. I really wish my husband was here so I could ask him because he has a lot of really strong opinions about this game. But I was really surprised by how badly it fell off because I thought it had such a fun vibe. I thought it had such a cool concept and I thought it looked really nice. It sounded good. You know, like I thought it had a lot of things going for it.
typical player count story. A really strong start with over 200,000 players, and a slow decline as the months rolled on. As of May 30th, it's at the lowest player count it's ever had, although it looks like it's going to stay at around 15,000, a 94% drop in the initial player base over 6 months. Which might sound bad, but for Embark Studios' first foray into gaming, 15,000 daily players is something new games companies would give anything for. I really enjoyed playing the finals. It has a lot of fun with different mechanics, like environmental destruction. It gives it a nice
The environmental destruction I thought was so cool in a game like this.
edge over more streamlined FPS games. It also encourages team play in a really healthy way, as each class has strengths and weaknesses that make it dependent on teammates to work effectively.
How many people are in a game? Like, how many people are on your team in the finals? 3, including you? 3. Okay.
The problem
See, it's a lot easier to do team shit when you have 3 people.
for me, and something that ultimately led me to stop playing the game regularly, was the matchmaking. My first impression of the game was extremely strong. I was really enjoying playing as each of the 3 classes, and the people I was playing against were admittedly not very good, and I felt a lot of control over whether our team would win or not. However, as I continued to play and win matches, I found that the matchmaking was putting me against increasingly difficult and overall sweatier opponents. Suddenly, the fun strategies I was implementing stopped working against players, and the potential scope of the mechanics began to narrow down. It even got to the point where I felt like I couldn't use certain character abilities, as they would almost universally achieve 0 results. I even eventually went entirely off the heavy class, as it felt too clunky, and I couldn't contribute positively. Very quickly, the game became just another sweaty shooter. Despite the fact that I never actually touched any competitive mode, I would find myself getting annoyed at certain classes and common matchups, and I wasn't having nearly as much fun as I was when I started out. It's not even that the game is bad, it's a really well made game with interesting mechanics. However, I was hoping for a more casual experience, and it's not one I could find within the game's matchmaking.
Tell me if I'm wrong. This sounds like not so much a matchmaking problem as a meta problem, which I guess is not entirely not related, because this was my understanding of the problem with that made this game less fun, right? Is that over time, the meta got really specific, really bad, like really like you could only play very specific things. And I don't know if that's so much a matchmaking issue or a skill issue. It sounds like the developers themselves were not balancing adequately. Am I crazy for that? Because that doesn't sound like a matchmaking issue to me. That sounds like the strategies that worked got really hammered in, and then the game got stale because there weren't very many ways to play. The meta is so specific, everything else is useless, including most of the fun destruction. It's a game out balance and meta issue. The problem was most of the time that different things will be stronger or weaker depending on your skill bracket. Overwatch has the same issue. I'll give you an example right now. It's kind of I've been exploiting the out of this. In teamfight tactics, Arcana Varus is disgusting. It is disgusting. I think people really don't understand how disgusting it is because it is simple to do. It is very easy to get your units. You don't need to 3-star any units to make it good. You don't even necessarily need to 2-star them, and you don't need any emblems. So like, it's a very simple comp to do, and you often can get it going, and it will do a lot of damage, even if you don't have everything that most other comps need. It's very simplified, right? And so what it sounds like is like, even in League, something doesn't necessarily have to be meta for you to do well with it. Riven is almost never meta, but if you're a one-trick Riven player and you just really hard at Riven, thank you for the tier, what's up? You just really hard at Riven, you can still potentially win, but it sounds like there's not really variation where you can play anything else. That because like some things are so strong that all of the other fun you can do is like a waste of your time. So this sounds to me not like a matchmaking problem. It sounds to me like it's a meta problem, you know? Because if they don't change up the meta, if there aren't multiple different ways to play and you have to play the same game the same way over and over and over again, and everybody's super sweaty, that's a recipe for disaster, no?
But being disillusioned by a game...
I would say that a game that up with matchmaking, personally, is Overwatch. Matchmaking and the rank system in Overwatch killed the game for me. I stopped playing it. And I probably will never play it again because the rank system, when they changed that stupid ass system where you had to play 7 games to get a rank update, ruined the game for me. That was a game that I personally think was ruined by matchmaking and its ranked system. It was not necessarily a meta issue. The problem was that I could win 7 games in a row and stay the same rank. And sometimes I would like, dude, oh God, there would be times where like I destroyed for 6 out of 7 games and I would lose 2 ranks. Yeah! And that's why I stopped playing. And I'd just be put in games with like, 2 ranks ahead above me, 2 ranks below me, like just insane. That wasn't me sneezing. That was me schizoing the out. But yeah, I think a game that was ruined by its matchmaking, ruined by its rank system is absolutely and 100% Overwatch. It was so bad. And then they try to like, oh, well, it's better now. It's only 5 games. And it was literally just as bad.
Due to its matchmaking does raise an interesting question. Is it really the system's fault to begin with? You may have heard this phrase before. Given the opportunity, players will optimize the fun out of a game. This is a quote from Soren Johnson, one of the leads on Civilization 3. It suggests that some people view games less as an entertainment medium and more as an optimization puzzle, one that, no matter the game, can be solved through either practice or understanding mechanics.
Honkai Star Rail players, period.
The problem with solving, or even attempting to solve, a game is that it effectively becomes complete and no longer interesting. And the more games you play, the better you get at solving them, and the easier new ones become to solve. I mentioned earlier the concept of figuring out a game's systems, and knowing that eventually you'll stop playing. That's you effectively solving the game in your mind, almost seeing the future of what the game will offer, and deciding that, since you already know what's coming, it's not worth sticking around to see it. The destiny of games is to become boring, not to be fun. Those of us who want games to be fun are fighting a losing battle against the human brain, because fun is a process, and routine is its destination. While this quote is more about gaming's place among society in general, I think it applies here too. The ultimate problem is that what makes a game interesting is some degree of uncertainty. If you knew how a strategy game was going to play out from start to finish, you wouldn't find it interesting. Like how tic-tac-toe stops being an interesting game to play once you know how to never lose.
True.
However, uncertainty is uncomfortable and something most people avoid fanatically in their day-to-day lives. The irony of gaming is that to enjoy it at its best, you must chase uncertainty and avoid optimization. It's why games like Rust and DayZ, relentless survival games, which from an outsider's perspective seem like a nightmare to play and manage, are insanely popular. There's a thrill to their uncertainty, that there's no guarantees from moment to moment, and even logging on doesn't guarantee you the same position that you left with.
Even though there's not a competitive nature to something like Rust, let's not pretend like there's not an insane amount of toxicity in those games and that people don't try to optimize those games as well. that the only reason you're not having the same competitive issue and like the matchmaking issue is because there's no competitive matchmaking. It's not a competitive game. But like, let's not pretend that the like optimization and taking the fun out of the game in Rust is not a thing. People are super toxic and absolutely optimize to just crush random little other cavemen with their little rocks and destroy everything they've ever built. I think that this is an unfair comparison because you're comparing a competitive game to a game that is not competitive. There is the same sort of energy in a game like Rust. It just comes out differently because it's a different kind of game.
Competitive gaming, both as a genre and a subculture, is about removing uncertainty in as many aspects as possible. And while professional gaming is a beloved subgenre of gaming, it directly defies games with more casual intentions, which means that games can lose their casual communities extremely easy if they're not careful.
That's fair.
Since casual players tend to outnumber hardcore gamers by a significant margin, live service titles rely heavily on being able to retain them for long periods of time. But what can be done to counteract the mechanical arms race? It's a systemic problem that is reinforced by competitive trends in gaming.
I mean, if we're gonna bring up fighting games, like how is a fighting game not gonna be mega competitive? This video is giving the energy of somebody that maybe doesn't want to play competitive games anymore. How are we supposed to make fighting games, which are 1v1 games where one person wins and one person loses, less competitive, more casual? Those games, by definition of what they are, of the function of a fighting game, they're highly competitive. I think that there are some valid points brought up in this video, but I guess to me, if you are playing competitive games competitively, yes, this is what's going to happen. This is the natural way that it happens. You can choose to not play competitive games in a competitive way. You can play casually, you can play with your friends. But if you play competitive games in a competitive sort of way and you spam the queue, yes, this is exactly what's going to happen. It's not like a games problem. People want to win. It's fun to win. People like winning and don't like losing. I don't understand. Like, I guess maybe I'm being obtuse. I do think that there's a validity that like losing really sucks in some games more so than it is worth it. I don't know. I don't feel like I totally agree with the premise of some of the things being said. Does that make sense?
And while it seems like a far-reaching problem that's nigh impossible to solve, there are practical things that can be done on many levels to counteract it. On a personal level, if you feel like the games you play are becoming too stressful, or they're just routinely frustrating, it's okay to switch to casual or more controllable single-player experiences. The concept of retiring from competitive games is a frequent phenomenon, especially for older gamers who have much less time to keep up with the race.
It's not time to keep up with the race. I think there's less of a desire. I don't get what this is about. I just don't feel like I understand what I'm watching right now. When you are getting older, I don't think it's that people have less time to dedicate to the game, you know, to the grind set. I think that, like, here's the thing that's like bothering me about this, right? You're 25, you work a 9 to 5, you're 40 hours a week, you come home and you're gonna spam competitive queue games and try to be as good as possible and try to be the best that ever was and learn all of this mechanical skill and watch all the tutorials and play all the games and like perfect all of your mechanics and all of those things. For what? For why? What is the point? You're probably not gonna be a streamer. You're probably not going to be a professional player, especially if you're 25. You're washed already. You're too old. You're not going to make a job out of it. Why are you treating games like your job? I think people want to treat games like games. It is okay to realize that games can be fun and they don't have to be so goddamn competitive. That's okay. That's not like, oh, they just don't have time to compete and so they don't bother. It's like, what are you competing for? What are you competing for? What are you doing all of that for? Especially if you're not having that much fun. Because, like, I can guarantee if you are spamming ranked games, at a certain point, that shit's not fun no more. I don't think that this is a problem necessarily fully of the games or people being too sweaty or any of that. It's just like people want to get off their job and have fun. People want to like play a game for fun, and eventually competitive stops being fun. That's how it is. And so like, I don't feel like I understand the premise of this at all.
Even just partially stepping away can do wonders for your enjoyment of games overall. Another option is to pick one competitive game to main and then avoid all others. For game developers, it's a difficult situation. No matter the type of multiplayer game, it's an open invite for players to try and optimize it.
Well, yeah.
The best course of action is to make something non-mechanical the primary selling point. It could be story, or a social feature, or any number of things. If you want to make a competitive game, it's better to fully commit to a competitive experience, rather than having it be a small part of a wider game. It's important to note at the end here that gaming isn't necessarily fated to continually get more competitive. There's plenty of evidence to suggest that the opposite is happening. All one has to do is see what the most popular games of recent years are. Elden Ring, Baldur's Gate 3, Lethal Company, all games without any competitive underpinnings. It's also fairly evident through browser.
You've clearly not ever dipped your toes into the terrible depths of Elden Ring PvP. I assure you some of these bitches are very competitive in that game. There are people invading in Elden Ring that have nothing in their hearts but hatred for the world and just dark-sided, demonic, sinister intentions. Clearly you don't understand.
Browsing online forums, that there's a growing disdain for competitive elements in video games.
100%.
Particularly matchmaking algorithms. Maybe one day in the future, games might find a happy balance between casual and competitive, all on their own. But until then, it's probably best to keep your head on a swivel.
Yeah, I don't know that I personally agree with the premise of this video. I don't think that being highly competitive is killing video games. I think people are looking to chill the out a little bit about their video games. I think people want to have fun when they play a game. They don't want a game that essentially functions as a second job if they had to be good at it. And it's not like it didn't take a lot of time and effort to be good at games 10 years ago. And so I think that a lot of people genuinely just want it to be an escape from being stressed and needing to be perfect. People have always been sweaty in games. Games have always been sweaty. You have some nostalgia goggles maybe for like how fun that sweatiness was. But I think that overall, over time, more and more, people just want to have fun, and that's okay. Not everything needs to be so competitive. I think that over time, the industry will continue to shift away from competitive games and more toward more enjoyable single player or multiplayer experiences that you can do with your friends. And I think that's all right. That is a natural thing that happens because gamers are getting older. And I just think overall in the world, people just want to be less stressed. People want to have more fun. What is the point of playing a game if it is just your second job? That's kind of my thoughts. I don't know if I personally agree with like the general concept of this video, but I did enjoy it nonetheless. I love hearing other perspectives. So let me know what you think down in the comment section below. I apologize for like the insane amount of yap in this video. There's a crazy ass amount of yap in this video for me. So I apologize. This was a reaction. So thank you guys very much for watching the video. Like, comment, subscribe. Let me know what you think. Come join us on Twitch if you ever have time. Say goodbye, YouTube, on Twitch chat. And yeah, if you come over here, you get at least 10 points of intelligence and Riz to your stats. So it's really important that you come over here if you want to get girlies. I'll see y'all later. Love yourselves. Drink water. Wash yourself with a washcloth in the shower. Bye!